And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is the power rankings for Week 12 of the Major League Rugby 2023 season. We are fastly going forward to the end of the season. Teams are slowly making their way into playoff position. The race is starting to heat up, and it is very, very exciting. This week of rugby, though, I have to admit, was a little bit. There were some odd games. There was, unfortunately, the second game in Major League Rugby history that had to be called off due to weather. So we had some. Not exactly an exciting week of rugby action. Of course, there's only 4 games this weekend, so you didn't have a lot to choose from. It is what it is. But to be honest, it just kind of makes for a very quick video. Not a lot of movement in the rugby ranks because of the fact that there's only 4 games. This coming weekend, we'll have everybody playing, so there might be a couple of interesting results, might be some movement. But for right now, just like last weekend, not a lot of movement for this week. So let's go straight into the power rankings. One of the teams that was on the bye, the bottom team of the league, the team from Canada, the Toronto Arrows, sits at the number 12 position. For those of you who don't know, when a team's on bye, I don't really feel confident or feel good in moving them up or down because they didn't really do anything. So I really am hesitant to move a team up or down when they are on bye, so they kind of tend to stick to the spot. The Toronto Arrows one is a little bit easy because they're at the very bottom. No one really lost significantly with the next 2 teams that I'm going to be discussing about, so there was no reason to move the Arrows out of the bottom spot at number 12. Number 11, a team that again has been struggling all season, the Dallas Jackals, still looking for that second win. Unfortunately, this weekend there was some interesting developments in their game. They played against against Old Glory DC. Unfortunately, the game was called off. Second game of the season, second game in history of Major League Rugby that had to be called off due to thunderstorms in the Dallas area. It was played at Choctaw Stadium. Dallas first on the board in the game, a penalty kick, and then Old Glory was able to score a try at literally the very last second by Willie Tatiana Moo. And then the game went into halftime. Weather was pretty nice from the way it looked. And then unfortunately, rain and the dreaded thunderstorms. The game was a very typical Argentinian style game for the Dallas Jackals this season. Very, very defensive, a little bit chippy. And Dallas looked like they had some opportunities to possibly make it interesting. So who knows how the second half would have went. Unfortunately, because of the Major League Rugby rules, as long as the game goes to halftime, and if it's delayed an hour due to weather, the game can be called off, and thus the game was called off. Dallas was denied a victory, and the flip side, Old Glory DC was denied a possible bonus point victory because they only scored the 1 try. Who knows what would happen in the second half? It is, again, another heartbreaker amongst heartbreakers this season for Dallas. Possibly could have made it interesting. They'll get another chance playing at home this coming weekend for Dallas. At number 10, another team struggling, the new kids on the block, the Chicago Hounds, who suffered a loss to Rugby ATL, 12-27. Honestly, this game was, again, very competitive. Chicago was in it in the first half. Unfortunately, the second half, Atlanta scored a couple of tries to put the game away. Kind of proving again the numbers that came up with the Chicago Hounds after the 60th minute. Usually that's when Chicago starts to fall apart, and it proves correctly in this game as well. The last 2 tries scored by Atlanta were after the 60-minute mark, and Chicago just could not catch up. As I mentioned before, it's very frustrating because Chicago has such an impressive team. There is definitely an issue with defense. If you watch the game, the tries that Atlanta scores, there's so many open holes. It's like Swiss cheese. it just feels like the Chicago players are just not on the same page when it comes to defense. Offense, no problem. They can score tries like nothing. It's just for whatever reason they're just not lined up correctly, or they just don't have the right defensive lines and defensive areas. A lot of just almost finger pointing after a try is scored. It's just like, well, didn't you get it? Weren't you supposed to get the guy? Weren't you marking this guy? They just can't seem to be on the same page when it comes to defense. And especially with Major League Rugby, defense is just as important as offense, almost in any game, really. And Chicago just really has bitten them a lot in this game. And unfortunately, Chicago is still looking for their second win of franchise history, second win of the season. Moving on, next place, NOLA, who used to be pretty hot, now really struggling as we go into the end of the season. NOLA Gold losing to New York 54-19. I'll talk a little bit more about this game when we get to New York, simply because, man, I kind of wrote off New York for dead because of all the injuries they've been dealing with. They were on like a 3-game losing streak. Really thought NOLA might be able to take advantage of New York because it was at the gold mine. But man, New York just slaughtered NOLA in this game. So NOLA stays down at number 9. Another team that unfortunately lost a pretty good game was the very streaky Utah Warriors, who were looking really good just a couple weeks ago, but now the same Utah from last season is starting to peer up, and they're starting to become a little inconsistent, and they slide a couple of spots down from number 6 to number 8, losing to arguably the best team right now in the season, the number 1 in the power rankings, the San Diego Legion. Utah losing 16-26. Now, granted, the losses that Utah have been having so far are against the topper echelon teams, especially in the West. But in this game, which was also, by the way, the game watch along game that we had. Again, thank you for everybody that came in to watch the game. It was a lot of fun. I'm gonna do it again this weekend with I believe it's the Houston-Seattle game, if I can remember correctly. Yes, the Houston-Seattle game this Saturday. I'll be doing another watch along. I didn't mention it last time, but I will mention it now, and I'll also put in the notes for this video that we will have another watch along, Houston versus Seattle. Hopefully it'll be just as fun as this watch along. The Utah-San Diego game was very competitive. It was very back and forth. It was very interesting because for most of the game, or at least for the first half, the first almost 80 minutes of the game, the first almost 60 minutes of the game, San Diego was playing with one man down because of almost three in a row yellow cards given to them, and yet they still were able to hold on to win. Utah was working really, really well. They were doing a lot of things right. It's just at the very end, unfortunately, there was a high tackle that was given to Utah, and San Diego just took that and ran, scored a go-ahead try by Michael Smith, and put the game away. It was competitive. Utah kind of fell off of it. I felt that Utah had this game kind of locked up in the first half, especially with the man advantage, and they just kind of let it slip through their fingers at the end. So that's what made me slide them down. Even though they lost to the best team, I just felt that they had the advantage. It was being played in Zion Stadium. It just wasn't a good loss for Utah, so I felt like it was right to just slide them down a couple of spots. So they went from number 6 to number 8. Number 7, staying at number 7, Rugby ATL, who, as I mentioned earlier, got a win over Chicago. In the game, just gonna make a shout out to Kirk Coleman, fly half forward. Rugby ATL unfortunately suffered a pretty bad HIA hit, head injury assessment that he had to go through. He did not pass his head injury assessment. Suffered from 100% a concussion. Hopefully he's feeling better. Hopefully he'll be able to play again in their next game. Other than that, Atlanta was going neck and neck with Chicago, and then, like I mentioned before when I talked about Chicago, after that 60th minute, Atlanta scored 2 tries, one of them off of a penalty on Charlie Abel, Chicago player, for a high tackle. allowed Atlanta to score 2 tries and put the game away. Again, wasn't as impressive a victory as I felt with the Utah loss, so ATL just kind of stays put at number 7. Number 6, though, moving up a couple of spots because it was an impressive win. The team that I felt was almost written off for dead, your reigning defending MLR champions, Rugby New York Ironworkers, moving up 2 spots from number 8 to number 6 after slaughtering NOLA. After slaughtering NOLA 54-19. Now, granted, there was a pretty gruesome head-to-head collision between 2 NOLA players, Devin Short and Billy Stewart. Hopefully both of them are doing well. It delayed the game for a good 20-some minutes because it was a very, very bad injury for both players. Hopefully they're okay. Both of them had to be stretchered away. But after that injury, man, it really took a lot out of NOLA's sails, and New York just poured on the tries. From that point on, they scored 6 tries back to back to back to back. 8 tries total in the game. NOLA really, like I mentioned, after that injury, really had nothing in them. They did score a couple tries at the very end, but it just wasn't enough. New York, it was all New York in this game. Big shout out to Jason Emery, the fly half for New York, who scored impressive 2 tries as well as was 7 for 8 off of the tee, 24 points on his own. Big contributor to this win, and New York moves up a couple of spots. And you know what? Maybe this was the surge that New York needed to see to make their way into the playoffs. So right now, I believe they're the 4th place team in the Eastern Conference. They are on the outside looking in, but if they play this good against Eastern Conference teams, they have a good chance of sliding back into that playoff position to hopefully be able to defend their title in the Major League Rugby Shield Championship, which I predicted would happen, but it's getting very close, so we'll see how New York does. And again, there's a lot of injuries still with New York. Hopefully they'll get most of their players back by the end of the season. Sitting at number 5 on a bye is the New England Free Jacks. As I mentioned before, Old Glory DC had that very weird game that was called off against the Dallas Jackals. They ended up winning 7-3. Not really an impressive win, not really much of a game, to be honest. So they stay at the number 4 position. Both number 3 and number 2, Houston Sabercats and the Seattle Seawolves, were both on bye, so they stay where they are. And thus, your number 1 team still, San Diego Legion, with a pretty impressive win over the Utah Warriors. So that's where our power rankings sit. Like I said, not very much of movement except for the 6 and 8 spots sliding over. Kind of helps when you have 4 teams on a bye, so not a lot of action going on. But again, you still have your pretty elite teams on the Western Conference sitting here. You have the good majority of your Eastern Conference teams right here. We'll see what happens if maybe Utah can get themselves back into position. Maybe NOLA might have another streak going into them. Who knows? But that is our power rankings. As I mentioned before, next weekend, week number 13, we're going to have all teams playing, so a lot more action, maybe possibly a lot more movement in our power rankings. Now, as much as it pains me, let's go over our Super Brew Rugby411 MLR Pick'ems. Man, it was a rough week for me, but we might as well go over these, and let's show the results for this week. And congratulations to BT Woodrow. First time I've mentioned his name. He is our winner with 8 points at the end of the week. Congratulations to BT Woodrow. He had all the teams right. Only 4 games, but he got all 4 games right and a couple of extra bonus points. So he's sitting at number 1 with 8. Right behind them is Matt MSDRFC 83 with 7 points. John Hawkins with 6.5, tied with the reviewer 812, 6.5. And then look who's in the top 5 all day long. Our reigning defending Pick'ems champion from last season with 6 points. First time I think he's been that high in a while. Unfortunately, at the very bottom, the wooden spoon getting no picks right. Tex, I can't really pick on Tex because I'm right behind him. I had a horrible, horrible week for this week, number 12. Let's go over the overall rankings, and it is going to be kind of interesting. Still in first place is Matt MSDR of FC 83, about 80.83, but he has extended his lead over SD Cal Guy, now at 4 points. SD Cal Guy is 76.33. Right behind him is John Hawkins with 74.83. Jahego, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, 72.49. Harry right behind, 17.16. And then, again, got to mention, because don't call it a comeback, number 6 is All J Long. He has been struggling, as most of us have this season, but he has managed to crawl his way up, and he is knocking on the doorstep at the top 5. Guys, watch out. All J Long is coming back to defend his crown. He is sitting at number 6, moving up 2 spots this week, 66.83. And near the bottom, of course, Tex, unfortunately, sitting at the bottom with 46 points. So, it's, MSDRFC 83, Matt, and SD Cal Guy have been fighting over that number 1 spot. But man, All J Long is knocking on the doorstep, and we still have a lot of rugby left. Anything can happen. All J Long could make the miracle comeback and defend his title as our Pick'em champion from last season. It will be very, very amazing. It'll be very interesting, and it could happen. So, as always, thank you very much, guys, for watching my video. Thank you very much for my Pick'em pool members for doing them. Remember, I'll talk about in the next video, we do have a game on Friday, so make sure you get your Pick'ems in early. So you don't miss out, because every pick'em point counts. So let me know, as always, if you agree with my rankings. Not a lot of change. Let me know what you think of our top 4. And as always, thank you very much for watching my video, and I'll see you on the pitch.